Welcome back to the Intelligent Founder AI podcast. In this episode, we're going to put real numbers on something most teams handwave. What Inference AP is really cost once your product actually has users.
Let me start with a number that should make you a little uncomfortable. If your AI product is using a frontier model API for every single request, and your traffic is growing the way you want it to grow, there is a reasonable chance that your infrastructure cost will become the single largest line item in your profit and loss before you reach Series A. Not your team, not your office, not your marketing, your compute bill. This episode is about understanding that bill completely. Not just the headline per token price that shows up in a provider's pricing page, but the full loaded cost of using hosted inference AP is, all the places costs hide that you are not measuring, when APs make sense, and critically, when they stop making sense and you need to make a change. Let me start with where the market is right now because it has changed significantly even in the last 12 months. There are now over 69 providers offering LLM inference. When there are 69 providers, you have a competitive market, and that means prices at the low end are genuinely low, but the range is enormous. At the expensive end, the latest frontier models from OpenAI and Anthropic run into the mid to high single-digit dollars per million input tokens, with output tokens costing significantly more. At the cheap end, open-weight models hosted on third-party infrastructure can be had for under 20 cents per million tokens. Between those two extremes is where most founders are making expensive, unexamined choices. Infrabase plus 2. To be concrete, the cheapest viable LLM API available today is around 14 cents per million tokens for input, with output at 28 cents. Compare that to the most capable frontier options, which can reach $180 per million output tokens for the highest end configurations. That is a 640 times price gap between the cheapest and most expensive options for output tokens. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. A 640 times gap. If you were paying 640 times more than you needed to for any other input to your business, any supplier, any service, you would fix it immediately. Most founders are not fixing this because they do not know exactly where they sit in that range or what the alternative actually costs. Fusion AI. Model selection, not architecture, is often the single largest cost driver at the API layer, and model selection is a decision you can change today. Now let me walk you through how to actually calculate your monthly API cost, because most founders I speak with have never done this calculation properly, end to end. The math is not complicated. The problem is most people skip it. You start with your daily active users. Then you figure out how many AI-powered interactions each user generates per day. Not total API calls. Meaningful interactions because one interaction often involves multiple calls. Then you estimate the token count per interaction, split into input and output. This split matters enormously. Input tokens are everything you send the model, your system prompt, any documents you have retrieved via RAG, conversation history, and the user's message. Output tokens are what the model generates in response. Output tokens are almost always priced higher than input tokens, sometimes 2 to 4 times higher. And for many application designs, output tokens dominate the bill, OpenAI. Let me run through a worked example. Suppose you have 10,000 daily active users. Each user triggers 5 AI interactions per day. Each interaction sends 2,000 input tokens and generates 500 output tokens. That gives you 50,000 interactions per day, 100 million input tokens daily, and 25 million output tokens daily. At a mid-range frontier model price of $3 per million input and $15 per million output, your input cost is $300 per day, and your output cost is $375 per day. Combined, that is $675 per day, or roughly 20,000 pounds per month stack spend. Now run the same numbers on a cheaper open-weight model API at 28 cents per million output tokens. Your output cost drops from $375 per day to $7 per day. Your total bill drops from 20,000 pounds a month to under 500 pounds a month. That is not a rounding error. That is a business model decision, and for many applications, a cheaper model produces output that is indistinguishable to the user. The key question is, what quality do you actually need for each task? And most founders have never asked it task by task. There are three things that determine whether the API approach makes sense at your current stage. The first is volume. At low volumes, APIs are almost always the right answer. The engineering overhead of deploying and maintaining your own models, even using managed serving platforms, is substantial. You need to manage containers, model weights, GPU drivers, batching, quantization, monitoring, and restarts. Until you are spending at least £15,000 a month on API calls, the economics do not justify self-hosting. Below that threshold, you are paying for convenience, and the convenience is absolutely worth it. Your time is better spent on the product. Bartosz Cruz. The second is predictability. AP is give you near infinite scalability with zero operational overhead on your side. You spike, you pay more, you scale back, you pay less. If your traffic is spiky, seasonal, event-driven, or genuinely hard to forecast, which describes most early-stage products, that flexibility has real monetary value. The moment your traffic becomes highly predictable and sustained, the API premium starts to feel like a tax you are paying month after month for flexibility you are not using. The third variable is model quality requirements, and this is where most teams leave the most money on the table. Some tasks genuinely require a frontier model. Complex multi-step reasoning. Code generation where correctness is critical. Tasks where a wrong answer has serious downstream consequences, but the majority of tasks in most production AI applications can be handled adequately by much smaller, much cheaper models. Customer support classification, document summarization, data extraction, simple Q&A, SQL generation from well-structured schemas. These do not need GPT-5. Routing these tasks to a smaller model, even within the same API provider's model family, can cut inference costs by 40 to 70% with no user-visible quality difference. Code brew tools. The discipline of task-level model routing is one of the highest leverage optimizations available to you, and it is available right now without any infrastructure change. It is purely a product and prompt engineering decision. Now let us talk about vendor lock-in, because this is a risk that is much larger than most founders realize until they are already inside it. When you build on a single inference API provider, you are not just locked in by the contract or the pricing. You are locked in by your accumulated prompt engineering work, because prompts are deeply tuned to the specific quirks of a particular model. You are locked in by your evaluation datasets, which are full of examples and expected outputs calibrated to that model's behavior. If you have done any fine-tuning, your fine-tuned weights live on that provider's platform. Your observability tooling is built around that provider's response format, latency profile, and error codes. SWFTE+1. The estimated exit cost from a fully loaded enterprise AI stack, migrating from one primary API provider to another, has been put at between $200,000 and $1 million in re-engineering work, plus several months of regression risk while you revalidate model behavior across all your use cases. That is the number most founders discover after they are already fully inside the dependency.swfte. The mitigation is simple to implement and adds minimal overhead. Use an abstraction layer between your application code and the vendor API. Tools like LiteLLM and Portkey are designed exactly for this purpose. Your application code calls the abstraction layer, which handles vendor-specific formatting, error handling, and retry logic. When you want to switch providers or test a new model or implement fallback routing, when one provider is slow, you make a configuration change rather than a code-based rewrite. Implement this on day one. It costs almost nothing at the start and is extremely expensive to retrofit later. Intrabit.com+1. One more thing worth flagging that many founders overlook: the difference between API pricing tiers. Most major providers offer tiered pricing based on monthly spend, with significant discounts at higher volumes. OpenAI, Anthropic, and the major neoclouds all have enterprise tiers with committed use discounts of 20 to 40% compared to pay-as-you-go rates. If you are spending more than £5,000 per month on a single provider and have not had a commercial conversation with them, you are almost certainly leaving money on the table. OpenAI. There is also the question of context caching, which has emerged as a meaningful cost lever in the last year. For applications where you are repeatedly sending the same system prompt or the same large context document on every call, providers including Anthropic and Google now offer cached context pricing. You pay full price the first time the context is processed, and a fraction of the price, might sometimes as low as 10%, for subsequent calls that reuse the same cached context. For retrieval-augmented generation applications where the same document corpus is queried repeatedly, this can reduce input token costs by 50 to 80%. OpenAI. For the companion spreadsheet, the API Scenario tab should include fields for daily active users, interactions per user per day, input tokens per interaction, output tokens per interaction, and a provider comparison across at least 3 options simultaneously. Build in a model routing row that lets you allocate what percentage of your traffic goes to each model tier, because that is the optimization lever you will use most in production. Next episode, we go deeper into the GPU rental layer, where you move from paying per token to paying per hour, and where a completely different set of economics applies. You've been listening to the Intelligent Founder AI podcast. If today's breakdown surfaced some scary numbers in your own stack, take 10 minutes to run them, and then send this episode to the person who owns your cloud bill.